as we try to summarize this conference and leave us with some action plans for the future, I need to tell you that as any self-respecting middle-aged hypochondriac Jew, I spend a lot of time reading about illnesses. You do too. Now, it's very important for me to see all the strange diseases I have to worry about. But in my late-night roamings in the depths of WebMD, I've also started wondering what are the conditions that we have as a society and as a community? And of course, professional deformation, what conditions afflict us as funders? Looking at the rarest diseases, I found 2 that we have and 1 that we don't have but should. The first disease we have is a very rare condition. It's called the Anton Babinsky syndrome. In this condition, the patients are sick or disabled but refuse or are unable to understand that they're ill. When confronted with the obviousness of their sickness, for example, they are in a hospital, they can't move a limb, they resort to colorful explanations and confabulations. In some cases, people who are blind maintain that they can see, and they go on describing imaginary scenarios that they see. Now, these people are not lying. They are absolutely convinced that they're healthy, and may even become violent when confronted with the obviousness of their illness. We are a little bit like that. We refuse to see the many ways in which our efforts as a community are not working. Yes, we always step up in times of crisis, but we delude ourselves regarding the obvious failures that we have in addressing many of the issues we have. As a community, for example, we've never spent so much money fighting anti-Semitism, and yet there has never been so much anti-Semitism. Like Anton patients, we deny, we fabulate. In Jewish identity, too, we refuse to see how sick it is that the richest community in the history of the Jewish people cannot guarantee high-quality Jewish education for all the Jews. Even after the enormous trauma and dislocation of the last 2 years, we keep refusing to see the many ways in which our community needs to change. So that's the first disease we suffer. We are willfully unaware of our dysfunctions, and instead of addressing them, we deflect, we come up with justifications and excuses. Eventually, we end up living in a world of our own imagination, unable to see the real world. Needless to say, this condition is potentially fatal, because those with Anton, by denying their illness, they also refuse treatment, the same way in which we, many times, refuse to change. The second condition is called the Kotar delusion, and it's a very rare illness in which the patient is healthy, but is convinced that she's dead. Eventually, this patient, it's funny until it's not, because these patients refuse to get out of bed, refuse to eat, refuse to drink, and of course the condition becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They really end up dying. And we as a community and as a society suffer from this disease as well. Instead of addressing our problems, we play dead. We assume that there's nothing we can do because we're in the midst of some irreversible social decline. In fact, declinism and catastrophism are the dominant ideologies of the 21st century. It's the only thing that left and the right agree on. We are in the midst of a decline, and we are in the eve of a catastrophe. Declinism is actually a tool of power, because when people believe that society is falling apart, they are more willing to invest power in the hands of an autocrat to save them. Every autocrat talks about decline. And because it's all about power, the declinism of today has no vision. Politics today are about preventing stuff. It's about preserving rights and privileges, which is fine, but it's not enough. It's never about the things we can build together. We keep hearing from the right, make America great again. Again, like when? Like, when were we better off as a society than now? And we kept hearing from the left, we have to deconstruct. But when we're done deconstructing, what are we building? Today we are caught between a right that wants to take us back to a mythical past that never existed, and a left that wants to take us to a future that can never be. In the same way that Kotar patients end up really dying, communities obsessed with decline start producing their own decline. They stop innovating, they worship the past, and they kill the future. In the Jewish world, sadly, we have our own version of declinism and catastrophism and our own version of negative politics. We are anti-Semitism, anti-assimilation, but we're mostly silent on what type of Jewish life we want to build. A double negative is not a positive. In Israel, too, people are defined what they oppose, not really by the vision they have for society. Many in the government are anti-liberal democracy, but what are they proposing besides more power for themselves? Many of us, myself including, are opposed to that, but what's our vision for Zionism besides opposing a corrupt and incompetent government? Declinism is based on fear, and in a vicious circle, it creates more fear. Which takes me to the third disease I found. This one we don't have, but we should. It's called the Urbach disease, and it's a complete inability to feel fear. Now, in real life, that's a very dangerous condition. People, for example, would pet rattlesnakes because they look cute. But we seem to have the opposite of that. We seem paralyzed by fear. So imagine if we had a dose of Urbach for a while. Imagine what we could do as a community, as leaders, and as funders if we weren't afraid. Afraid of what others would think, afraid of losing your job, of losing your space at the tables in which you sit. Imagine what you would be doing right now, personally and philanthropically, if you weren't afraid of failure. Imagine what the Jewish people could achieve if we weren't obsessed by the fear of not being liked and accepted by others. We all sing that song, "Be'aikar lo lefachet klad," and the most important thing is not to be afraid, and yet we are building our identity around fear. Fear prevents us from dreaming, it kills imagination, and it kills empathy. And because we as funders are in leadership position, our fear doesn't end with us, it trickles down to the entire community. And that's serious because now is the worst time for leaders to be afraid. These times demand more courage than ever. We need to find our voice and speak up in defense of our people, in defense of our values, in defense of democracy. If it's not the time now, then it will never be. So how do we extricate ourselves from these delusions? How do we get unstuck? In other words, how do we lead the community in these times? I'm far from having all the answers, but that never stopped me before. So I want to offer a few ideas. One, if we want to lead, we need to take responsibility. Our elected leaders have become champions in the shady art of taking no responsibility. We, alas, don't have that luxury. When Moses saw that an Egyptian was beating a Hebrew slave, he didn't say, oh, it's the previous administration. The Bible says, Bayar ki en ish, and he saw that nobody was taking responsibility, so he stepped up. The biggest leadership journey in the history of our people starts with a simple act of taking responsibility. Our journey needs to start in the same way, by taking responsibility for our failures and understanding that we are now at the wheel. Two, to lead, we need to develop and communicate a vision. The Bible says, "Be'en chazon ipara am." When there is no vision, the people perish. We obviously can't wait for our political leaders to give us a vision. It's on us to develop it or help others develop it. We are the people who created the most positive vision in the history of humanity. We surely can do it again. Let's think not only in terms of what we want to fight, but what we are fighting for. Let's dream big, and equally important, let's give our grantees, our communities, the permission to dream big. Three, we all need to be proud. Many Jews have internalized the idea that we are a people on probation, as if our acceptance by others is conditional. Now, we aren't perfect. We aren't even better than others, but we must command the same dignity and respect that any other community would demand. It means that we don't go through life apologizing for being. And of course, And of course, to be proud, you need to know who you are. You need to know your tradition, your history, the commonality of faith that unites us all. And for that is the fourth thing. Good leaders learn. They study more than others. They read more than others. Of the king, the Torah says that he must write his own Sefer Torah, which must always be with him, and he shall read from it all the days of his life. Without constant study, leadership lacks direction and depth. We live in a time of enormous change, and that requires of us permanent learning. And it requires something even more difficult, unlearning, getting rid of mental biases and conceptual frameworks that have become obsolete. 5, philanthropic leaders can't lead alone. This is not new. We always say that. And in this crisis, we've become much better at collaborating. Examples like the Day After Fund in Israel are great, massive steps in the right direction, but we need much more. This is the time to think more in terms of we than in terms of me. And 6, be kind. We live in times in which people equate being a jerk with being brave. It's the exact opposite. When you are unkind, you show weakness, not strength. In these unprecedented times, everybody is fighting a tough battle. I know I am. So everybody needs kindness. Give it to yourself and give it to others. My friends, as we close this conference, let's make a commitment here and now that we won't deny, we won't play dead, and we will at least try to be fearless. Decline is never inevitable. It's always a choice. And the antidote to declinism is not optimism, it's action. It's not exaggerated to say that we live today in a time that will be read about in history books 1,000 years from now. What do we want history to say about us? We don't choose the time in which we live. This is when and where the cosmic lottery or the will of God placed us. And every person, each of us, need to ask, what for? As we go back home, we need to remember that we're stronger than we think. We are not limited by our abilities or our strength, but by our lack of vision. We just celebrated Purim, a holiday about anti-Semitism, but also a holiday of joy. It looks contradictory, but it isn't. Our joy, right after narrowly avoiding extermination, says something critically important. We will not be intimidated. We will not be paralyzed. We will not be defined by our enemies. We will not stop laughing. Or as the Nova survivors say, we will dance again. In our times, when we are reliving the nightmares of the past, we feel that the Bible was right when it said that there's nothing new under the sun. It's true. Nothing new under the sun, but the Bible forgot one critical detail. Each of us can be a new sun. So thank you. Thank you.